We'll intervene whenever we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it.
The problem with America is not that we go around marauding around the world imposing ourselves. The problem with America in the last 10, 15 years, since the end of the Cold War, really in the last 60 years, is that we've been too slow to get involved.
I don't know how many Iraqi civilians were killed, but I can assure you that the number is the absolute minimal that it's possible in modern warfare.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Welcome to the darkened hour.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Adam.
Good afternoon, Richard.
Afternoon. Okay, so one of the things this podcast gives us the opportunity to do is jump in depth to the minute details, and this is kind of an example of that. We're going to focus on one of the supposed hijackers today, Ziad Jarrah, who was the pilot of Flight 93 that crashed at Shanksville. Ziad Jarrah was the only Lebanese hijacker, and he was not a radical Muslim in his youth, certainly, so has been the focus point of some documentaries on the Hamburg cell, as he's become kind of poster child for radicalisation, making perhaps the biggest journey in that sense. And maybe that's the whole story about him, really, the story of a fairly secular young man who falls into the wrong crowd, gets radicalised and does this horrendous thing, only to say that his family have never accepted that he was involved in these heinous crimes. So that's what I'm going to be asking you about today, Adam. Is that the full story? You've just authored an article on Jarrah, and what was it called?
The Missing 9/11 Hijacker.
Okay.
And I posted it to Medium.
Okay, well, we'll link to that. So you've done a lot of research on this. I'm sort of vaguely aware of the most superficial details. So today, Adam's going to try and educate me on Ziad Jarrah, and if there's anything more to the story than immediately meets the eye. And in doing so, hope it's educational for people out there too. So, Adam, I've just given the most bare bones of it. You take that up wherever you want then with tell us about this man, Ziad Jarrah.
Yeah, sure. Ziad Jarrah is incidentally the most mysterious character out of all the 9/11 supposed hijackers, out of all the 19. And he certainly doesn't really fit the mold. And in order to give it a much more clearer context, I'll just be generalizing his background. And Jarrah was actually born in Beirut, Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, and was raised in the city of Tariq Jiddah. And his parents were nominally Sunni Muslim, but they lived a secular lifestyle. Jarrah even went to a prestigious Christian school called the French Lycée Collège de les Sagras. And at a very young age, in his nominal formative years, he always wanted to be a pilot. And incidentally, his father, Samir Jarrah, vetoed that choice right off the bat. And, quote unquote, I didn't want my son to crash, considering that he was clumsy as a child. So he settled for a course in aeronautical engineering and aircraft design at the school. 1995, Jarrah actually leaves Lebanon and goes to Yemen. And he stays there with his cousin Salim al-Jarrah. And a year later, Salim al-Jarrah and Ziad moved to Greifswald, Germany. And they arrived there in April of 1996. And Ziad Jarrah wanted to take a certificate course in German at the University of Greifswald. And if you're a student on a student visa, you have to learn the language before you take any specific courses, and that's what he had to do. That's why he took the certificate course in German at the University of Greifswald. He had to do it. But at night he goes to parties, nightclubs, etc. And it was here in the summer of '96 he meets Azel Senguin, who becomes his girlfriend over time. And within a few months of arriving in Germany, Ziad Jarrah automatically links up with a known hardline Muslim, a known Orthodox Islamist called Abdurrahman al-Makdadi. And Makdadi is known in circles in Palestine. He's a Hamas supporter. He funds money in Germany to raise for Hamas in Palestine. And at this time, he's also monitored by the German intelligence services, the BFV, which is the Bundesmat für Verfassungsschutz. And in English, it's the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. In short, I'll be calling them the BFV. Now, at around this time, the BFV is also monitoring Ziad Jarrah. So as far back as 1996, the summer of 96, you have the German intelligence BFV monitoring not just the Islamists that are in Germany, but also Ziad Jarrah as well. Now, Jarrah starts to attend prayer meetings at the college organized by al-Makdadi. Now, this right away makes you scratch your head. Now, here's a young man, Ziad Jarrah, who's never known to be quite religious. And as soon as he gets to Germany, within 2 to 3 months, he's meeting known radical Islamists, which doesn't really fit well with his upbringing. But in 1997, Jarrah leaves Greifswald and instead becomes studying aerospace engineering at the Fachhochschule at the University of Applied Sciences in Hamburg. Jarrah also meets with an individual who's only known as Marcel K. Now, Marcel K is a Muslim convert. He's also the vice president of the Islamic Center in the North Rhine-Westphalia. And Marcel K is a close confidant of Ziad Jarrah. And because Jarrah always calls him before making important decisions. For example, he when he leaves to train in Afghanistan, when he applies for admission to U.S. flight schools, he calls Marcel K during his pilot training. And shortly before 9/11, he calls Marcel K in contact and never loses contact with him over the years. In Hamburg, Jarrah begins a college course in aircraft engineering. And this is where he's suspected to have met with Muhammad Atta at Al-Quds Mosque, which is a known Salafist mosque that preaches Wahhabi Islam. And this is where he meets supposedly Marwan al-Shehi and Ramzi bin al-Shib. Now, Atta disappears from his university over a year in 1997, giving only like a vague explanation of friends for his absence. Western intelligence starts establishing that Atta and Ziad Jarrah and Marwan al-Shehi travel to Afghanistan, and they go into Tanakh Farms, which is one of the camps of Al-Qaeda. And in April of 1999, Ziad Jarrah has an unofficial wedding at the Al-Quds Mosque. This is the only time where he is monitored by the BFE as meeting in the same room as Muhammad Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, Ramzi bin al-Shib. And this happened on April 1st of 99. Happened to be also, what's that holiday on April 1st? I forgot the name of the holiday, but April
Fool's Day here. Yeah.
April Fool's Day, so go figure. But they have a wedding ceremony at the mosque, but they don't register the wedding with the German government, so it's not legally binding, by the way. But it's also filmed by the BFE. There's pictures online where you can see Ziad Jarrah. He's in the same room with Ramzi bin al-Shib, Marwan al-Shehi, Syrian contacts. Well, Mahmoud Darkanzali is there. He's actually someone who has financial ties to Muhammad Atta and Marwan al-Sheikh. It keeps bank accounts open for them as well.
Yes, just to clarify, that's essentially 3 of the 4 pilots in the same room together. There, Moran
That's right.
al-Shehhi was flight 175 into the second of the towers to be hit, and Attar was flight 11 into the first one.
That's right. And also, who's not at the Al-Quds or the Hamburg cell? The only suspected pilot, that's Hani Hanjour, flight 77. Now, there's 2 cells, actually. I want to make clear. You have the Saudis, Khalid al-Midar, Nawaf al-Hamsi, and Hani Hanjour out west, and the Hamburg cell in the east of the United States. So you have the Mal-Midar cell, that's the American Airlines Flight 77 group in California, Arizona, and the Hamburg cell in New York, that's Ziad Jarrah, Mohamed al-Shehhi, Mohammed Atta in New York, New Jersey, and Florida. Okay,
that's none of them are actually Saudis, right? Oh, that's quite interesting, given the
right. Well,
the number of Saudis and the 3 of the 4 pilots aren't actually.
That's correct. Only Hani Hanjour is a Saudi. Mohamed al-Shehhi, Ziad Jarrah is Lebanese. Mohammed Atta is Egyptian. Hani Hanjour is Saudi. Mohamed al-Shehhi, I believe.
He's from the Emirates, isn't he?
Yeah, right. I think United Arab Emirates. Yeah. But yeah, incidentally, all of the Saudis were muscle hijackers except for one, and it's Faiz Bani Hamad. And I think he also, too, is from the United Arab Emirates as well. In October of '99, one of the members of the Al-Quds named Saeed Bahaji, he gets married. And this is the only time where German BFE actually has video. Now, they have photo evidence, but this is the only time where they have video evidence. And History Channel incidentally obtained this video evidence where Ziad Jarrah, Mohammed Atta, and Ramzi bin al-Shibh are at the wedding. Now, there's photographs, but this is the only video evidence of itself. And Mark Moondar Ghazali is seen at the video. And during this time, incidentally, Ziad Jarrah never lives with any members of the Hamburg cell. Later on, German authorities will say that Jarrah was never in any connection with members of the Hamburg cell. And I'll use the quote, "The only information we have connecting the 3 Hamburg suspects, Jarrah, Mohammed al-Shehhi, and Mohammed Atta, is the FBI's assertion that there is a connection," end quote. And that's coming from a high-ranking police source within the BFE that was interviewed by Carol Williams of the Los Angeles Times. And quote, we have absolutely no evidence of our own. And
I don't quite follow that, because if they were monitoring him and he was at the Al-Quds Mosque, wouldn't that be a connection?
Well, I mean, that would be, would it be a connection to him inside the Al-Quds Mosque? I would say if that's the only connection, that's really flimsy, because he's only there because of the wedding itself.
So there's no sense of him connecting with Moran al-Shehhi, Mohammed Atta, outside of the mosque and the wedding.
That's correct. In Germany, by the way. Outside of Germany, there is a video of Mohammed Atta and Ziad Jarrah at Tadek Farms, and the video is entitled "The Will."
What's Tadek Farms? Can you just explain that, please?
Tadek Farms is an Al-Qaeda training base where they train guerrilla hand-to-hand combat, the use of like grenades, AK-47s in close combat quarters.
And this is in Afghanistan?
Yeah, this is in Afghanistan.
Okay.
That's where, there's other training camps as well, Al-Farouk, Al-Tariq, there's 4 of them, but Tadek Farms is basically the biggest of them all. That's where Osama bin Laden goes, and there's like a video of him talking to a crowd sitting outside, and it's the only video in existence that shows Mohammed Atta, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, and Ziad Jarrah listening to Osama bin Laden talking. Now, it's also, this was found by the Marines in a farm at Tadek Farms, where they found a video called "The Will" in Arabic. It's translated to "The Will," and there's no sound. But it's also the only video in existence where Ziad Jarrah is filmed with Mohammed Atta. And
Yeah, they're not able to lip sync them, are they?
That's funny. Supposedly that lip syncers were brought in by I think it was either the Marines or the U.S. Army, and they tried, and they said they don't know what they're saying. Take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, lip read, I should have said. Yeah,
Right,
they
right.
look like they could be more than videos, right? But that's obviously conjecture then.
Right. There was an old video years ago on YouTube, and I was very fortunate to burn it at the time. And it shows a close-up of the paper that Ziad Jarrah is holding, and he's talking with Mohammed Atta. And at the back, written in Arabic, I don't know what it says in Arabic, but translated, it's called something of the will. And there was a video posted on YouTube. It's not there anymore. It's on, I think it's on archive.org, where the video breaks down what the will is actually trying to say in regards to what Ziad Jarrah was writing up. At the same time, the NBC later on did a video regarding Ziad Jarrah's actual will, a video will of his own, and he's seen laughing in it. He can't perform with a straight face. And there's somebody who's filming him, encouraging him to become more serious. And what I'm trying to imply that is that, this is pretty contradictory to the other video wills that came out later by As-Sahab, the Al-Qaeda media arm, where the Saudi muscle hijackers did video wills of their own. One of them was Abdul Aziz Al-Amari. His video will was an hour long. And you could see right away these Saudis were very dead-faced. This was videos that they did before the 9/11 attacks happened. And so, yeah, these videos exist. I have 10 of them. There's a couple that they did. The Al-Shari brothers, Wael and Waleed Al-Shari, they did video wills. And so, like all of them, they were dead straight. But Ziad Jarrah's video will couldn't be completed because he just couldn't go through with it for some reason. He just didn't take it seriously. So there's a contradiction. What I'm trying to say, there's a contradiction between the militant that he's trying to portray and his upbringing, which is contradictory to what we're seeing from the historical timeline that we're supposedly given by U.S. authorities, and it would coincide pretty well with German authorities, where they had no direct link between Ziad Jarrah and the members of the Al-Quds, the Hamburg cell, which is pretty. By the way, Al-Quds was a very strict Orthodox Wahhabi sect of Islam. All the members there are very hardline, and Ziad Jarrah tried to portray that, and German authorities really saw no link to it because he was hardly ever there, and he never lived with any members of the Hamburg cell in Germany either. There was only one time where he lived with a hijacker, and that was Ahmed al-Haznawi, and he lived with him in Maryland for 2 days in a hotel room. That was it.
Yeah, so there are these connections. Like, he's clearly involved in whatever's going on, because he eventually ends up in Florida, not at the same place as Mohammed Atta and Maran al-Sheikhi, though, right? And then at various times he's frequenting the same locations as the other hijackers.
Right, and he goes and he visits like the apartments of Mohammed Atta, Ramzi bin Oshib. For example, in October of '99, Ramzi bin Shabib and Mohammed Atta live in an apartment that was founded by another Syrian contact, Mohammed Haydar Zamar, who's friends with Mahmoud Darkanzali. And these guys are big-time gun runners. They're drug dealers. They have contacts with an Al-Qaeda, high-level contacts, but with Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Mohammed Atef, the military commander-in-chief. These are the guys who are molding the Hamburg cell and forming them to become an organization within itself. Now, in October of '99, bin Shabib, Marwan al-Sheikhi meet with another Al-Qaeda, supposedly high-level contact, Mohammed al-Slahi. And he invites him to come to where Slahi lives in Duisburg, Germany. So bin Shabib, al-Sheikhi, and Ziad Jarrah go then visit him there. Karim Mehdi, who's an apparent leader of the Al-Qaeda Ruhr Valley cell, who's sentenced to like 9 years after the 9/11 plot, forms the meeting with them. And so bin Shabib al-Sheikh and Jarrah followed the advice of Slahi. Now, supposedly, this is coming from the admission of Ramzi bin Shabib. Now, take this with a grain of salt, because bin Shabib is tortured 78 times by the CIA. He's waterboarded 78 times.
Yes.
So all this information that I'm telling you is coming from the information of Ramzi bin Shabib. And he's talking because he knows Slahi personally. So this is what I just wanted to put that right out there right away. So Slahi's advice was to go to and also Slahi too. He was tortured. He's just released.
Well, he disputes all this, right? He says
he
vaguely might have known Ramzi bin al-Shabib somehow.
That's
sort of
correct.
recalls him. Absolutely does not know the others. Has no involvement in Al Qaeda, and he thinks this is complete fabrication.
That's correct.
I mean, you might want to come on to this in a bit, but he's out of Guantanamo Bay now, right? He's
he's out now.
Never charged with anything.
Right, and I just have to apologize because I should have stated this a little bit earlier. Slahi, and by the way, the CIA actually states at the end that Slahi and Abu Zubaydah, by the way, another high-level supposed they had no relevant information. So, now, right, when he's released.
Which kind of implies that the story we have and that the one in the commission report about how the Hamburg cell came together isn't true in its entirety.
Right, which I'm telling the listener too. Take this with a grain of salt, because it's the only information that we have regarding the Hamburg cell is coming from the admissions of people who they tortured right away. But after Atta, al-Sheikh, and Jarrah go to Tanakh Farms in Afghanistan, and they come back to Germany, they all report their passports stolen. Now they're doing this so they could cover their tracks that they went to Afghanistan in the first place. Now the old ones bore the evidence that they went to bin Laden's camp, was stamped that they went to Kabul in Afghanistan. So they apply and receive new passports, and they all get new passports. In January 17-18 of 2000, Mohammed Atta and Ziad Jarrah go back to Afghanistan. They go back to Tanakh Farms. Now, this is significant because this is what I was bringing up to you earlier, that this is the only time where they are filmed together recording their wills, their martyrdom wills in Afghanistan. Like I said, the film has no sound, and the footage is significant because this is the only time where we see Atta and Jarrah together. Now, the only video evidence that we saw Jarrah before this was at the wedding, Saeed Bahaji's wedding. But they're not together, talking together, just in the same room. This is the only video where they're seen together and talking to one another. It's the only video in existence. And this is the only time where they're filmed at the same place at the same time in Afghanistan. So, in other words, besides the testimony of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin Shabib, Abdul Aziz Ali, all the rest of the people who were charged with the 9/11 attacks at Guantanamo, along with Slahi, along with Abu Zubaydah, these are all people who have been tortured endlessly by the CIA. And they admitted this all under duress of torture. And Ziad Jarrah actually leaves Afghanistan, he goes back, and is briefly detained in Dubai, at the Dubai airport. Now, some reports will suggest that this is only because he's already on a U.S. watch list. I think this is true. I think they've been monitoring this guy even because German intelligence was monitoring him in '96. So
can you give the date for this, Adam? Because there's been a lot of confusion about whether this was January of the year 99 going into 2000 or 2000 going into 2001. There were conflicting reports about that. What's your
right now? This is going to be tough because supposedly it's January 30th of 2000.
Okay, yeah, I think that's the date that got settled on after the contradictory reports.
Right. Well, I'm just going by what Lebanese authority. Now, I don't think they're going to lie about it, because they actually wanted him detained at the airport. Because they saw on his passport, supposedly that on his passport was a picture of the Quran, Ziad Jarrah, like in a picture of the Quran. Whether he wanted to pose himself as a Islamist or whatever, or whether he was. That's pretty obvious. Why would he put that there knowing that you're going to have problems entering another country who tried to not have Islamists in their own
Yeah,
country.
the CIA denied that they had any foreknowledge, but it came out from the country's authorities that that's where the instruction had come from about Jarrah. And it seems also, Kevin Fenton makes the point that it seems like a cut and paste story about that he was acting suspicious at the airport, so that they picked him up. It seems like a story that's covering up for the deeper intelligence reasons that he was picked up, because it's a story that's used for other suspicious characters at different times. So it seems to be cut and paste about it.
Yeah, exactly. And also, this also brings me up to another instance back in 1990, in the 93 bombing. Now, in 1992, Ramzi Youssef was entering New York, and he was with Ahmed Hajjaj. And Ahmed Hajjaj actually in his suitcase had an Al-Qaeda manual. He had bomb-making manuals in his suitcase, and the authorities saw that. They detained him. Meanwhile, Ramzi Youssef didn't have anything on him. He had a faulty passport, but he was actually let go. He went to Brooklyn, and he was involved in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing plot. With Jarrah, it's almost similar to that story, because here's a guy supposedly Lebanese authorities open up his luggage and they find religious materials, that show that he was in Afghanistan, and he has this passport with the Quran is superimposed on his passport. So in other words, what I think he's trying to show the authorities, hey, I'm an Islamist.
Well, do we see that again with particularly with Mohammed Attar's luggage on September 11 itself, where he checks in a bag which doesn't go on the plane, and the bag is like basically everything you would need to be a terrorist, from pilot uniforms to manuals on flight navigation to, and there's even a letter in there about like how to confront the task they have ahead of them, and it's something that it's bizarre, right? There's no, because I mean, what was he even going to do with those uniforms when they were checked in? How did they play a role? All these kind of questions come up. So you do see people acting in a way that seems counterintuitive whilst going through airports.
Right. In other words, what they're trying to portray themselves as is that, yes, I'm an Islamist. In other words, if they were actually Islamists and trying to conduct an operation as big as 9/11, why would you leave a paper trail?
You don't take terrorist paraphernalia in your bag when you go to the airport.
Right.
Yeah, and we probably will talk about like Attar's story at different times. I don't want to go too much into that. I want to focus on Jarrah, but yeah. But essentially, I think the essential thing to take away from that point, it seems conclusive that the CIA were monitoring him in January of 2000 then, and prior to that, but definitely from that point on, he seems to be, January 2001, because he's picked up at the airport.
Correct. And I think with the Lebanese authorities that they wanted to detain him, so they called the State Department, whoever they called, and the State Department said, no, I'll let him go and we'll monitor themselves, which I think is true. Now, the CIA states that, no, this was not true, but it came out later that it was true. Actually, the CIA did monitor Ziad Jarrah. It would fit well because the CIA at this point was also monitoring people at the Malaysia summit meeting.
Yeah.
That's Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hamzi, Ramzi bin Shabib, and others. So why wouldn't they, monitor other
I mean, this is something we talked about in the series, but essentially if the CIA, well, we know they continue to track Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hamzi as they came into the west coast of the United States coming out of the Malaysia summit. And what we're seeing also is it seems they had the other hijackers too. It seems like through Ramzi bin al-Shabib going back to the Hamburg cell, and through Ziad Jarrah that they picked up the Hamburg cell who were going to Florida then. So we suspect a similar level of monitoring.
Sure, and I think I don't think they were alone either. You've had other intelligence apparatuses, like, for example, the Saudi GID, which is the General Intelligence Directorate. They're monitoring al-Mihdhar, al-Hazmi, Hani Hanjour out west. And of course, when Ziad Jarrah, Mohammed Attar, Marwan Hashi entered the United States, the Israeli Mossad are monitoring them in New York, in New Jersey, and Florida. Just for example, not just that one agency is involved. There's numerous intelligence agencies. So they're all watching from abroad and within the United States. But needless to say, on January 27th of 2000, Ziad Jarrah enters the United States, and he enters on a tourist visa, which was issued to him in Berlin on May 25th of 2000. He immediately flies to Venice, Florida, and he arranges to take full-time lessons at the Florida Flight Training Center in December of 2000. He attends also Florida Flight Training Center in Venice, Florida, where he takes lessons in a Cessna 152. And according to the FBI, he finishes his training there, gets a certificate in December of 2000. Now, what I'm trying to say is also now Ziad Jarrah is also training on his own. He's not training with Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shehhi, because they're training at Huffman Aviation. And they get their certificates in December of 2000, incidentally, as well. But Ziad Jarrah is always alone at this point. He's never with the Hamburg cell. He never meets them until later on. He meets Ahmed al-Haznawi in 2001. He rents a room with him in Maryland.
Remind me who he is.
Ahmed al-Haznawi is one of the members of the hijacking team aboard United Airlines Flight 93.
Okay.
And also, he stayed just a week prior to the September 11th attacks. He rents a room he rents a motel room at the Days Inn Motel in Newark, New Jersey. And meanwhile, the rest of the Flight 93 hijacking team, that's Ahmed al-Nami, Saeed al-Ghamdi, and Ahmed al-Haznawi, all living in the same room. Now, Ziad Jarrah pays for that room as well, pays for it in cash, according to FBI transaction records. And Ziad Jarrah actually, during this time, he actually rents a car and he drives to Maryland. And he's actually not arrested, but he's detained for speeding.
Now,
and which is pretty. Yeah, go. No,
so you finish what you're saying there, and I'll make my.
Actually, he's detained for speeding, and he's going, and he's actually in a lane that goes 35 miles an hour. According to the state trooper who pulls him over, he's going 94 miles an hour.
So he's one of 5 of the 19 who were detained for speeding at some point.
That's correct. In fact, yeah, there's a couple of people who are caught for speeding.
Well, I think there's 5. Am I correct about that?
I only know him. Nawaf al-Hasbi, I believe, was caught for speeding once. I don't know the rest.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pause. Audience, hello. I'm going to pause here and check that I'm correct about that. Okay, I've just read about this on History Commons, and I'm not entirely clear if it's the number is 4 or 5 from it, just from the way the paragraph is written. It talks about Ziad Jarrah and Mohammed Atta, and then 3 other, but I'm not sure if Mohammed Atta is one of the 3, but 4 or 5 hijackers were stopped for speeding. Now, perhaps you can sort of fill me in on an American angle on this, Adam, because like where I live, you would have to drive past the police station at 90 miles an hour, honking your horn and pulling a sign at them to get stopped for speeding. Okay, like it's really hard to get stopped for speeding here, and that might be a peculiarity of the country I live in, and it might be very different in the United States. I know there's a low speed limit on the freeways there and so on, but it does seem to me that whether it's 4 or 5 out of 19 from a group of people who are supposed to be keeping a low profile, that it's 20 to 25%, right? And that seems obscenely high for any random sample of people to be stopped for speeding. Maybe it's not in the United States, I don't know, but what's your take on that?
Well, it's quite surprising, considering that when he gets pulled over, it's 2 days before the 9/11 attacks. Okay, it's on September 9th, and he's actually on Interstate 95, heading towards Maryland. So the speed limit there, as far as top speed is 35 miles an hour. The state trooper, whose name is Joseph Catalano, pulls him over because Ziad Jarrah is going 91 miles an hour. If you wanted to lay low, if you wanted to stay low in regards to completing the biggest operation in your life, you would not be going 60 miles an hour over the speed limit.
No, there's maybe the psychological reasons for that if you know you're going to die. But it's also the case that his, even though he's on a watch list, nothing triggers about that in the state troopers system, right? So he could have been picked up at that point as a potentially dangerous terrorist.
Sure, because
on a CIA watch list.
absolutely. Why? Because he was already detained at the United Arab Emirates in Lebanon. I'm sorry, not Lebanon, the United Arab Emirates, in regards to him having a superimposed Quran on his passport, and other religious materials were found in his luggage. I mean, of course he was on a watch list. But when Catalano issued him a ticket, he ran him in the database, came back clean. Now, either you could say, of course, one who's listening to this podcast could say, well, Ziad Jarrah may have known this in advance, knowing that he can get away with speeding 60 miles an hour and not be detained, or that he wasn't aware that intelligence apparatuses could be covering his tracks and eliminating any type of infractions he may have in his background, in his profile. That could be the case too. We'll not know with the information that we have public available now. Doesn't suggest the case, but I mean, you can see how conspiracies can arise from this. But I would just say be careful and refrain from using speculation as a form of evidence. Sure. I mean, but yeah, I mean, it does make you think, like, how can this guy become so obvious to law enforcement by doing something so ridiculous as speeding over 60 miles an hour?
Well, it raises the question of is this something kind of like a crazy action, or it harks back to the Lee Harvey Oswald thing of going around saying, I'm Lee Harvey Oswald and I want to shoot Kennedy, and so on, and creating this kind of image right prior to the event. And you see that kind of behavior of Mohammed Attar trying to rent crop dusters to gas people with, and so on,
Right. Right. And it's almost at times where, like, especially with Mohammed Attar and Ziad Jarrah, where they wanted to make their tracks known. That could be the case also if you wanted to look deeper at Khalid Ahmed or Nawaf al-Hazmi. They were staying with an FBI informant, they were renting rooms from him. But meanwhile, at night, I mean, according to neighbor testimonies in FBI memorandums, they were like, driving in limos. People were picking them up. They were loud, listening to loud music. So, in other words, they weren't laying low. In other words, these people, almost like making a spectacle of themselves.
Okay, so I have a few questions about the story so far, but do you want to proceed on with the narrative first?
Well, if I could just say a little bit more, because during the final days before 9/11, Ziad Jarrah almost makes like a track, and this is a story that really doesn't get much airplay, but something that we've hinted on in our series. On September 7th, when he was staying at the Mona Lisa Apartments in Maryland, it was reported by the FBI after the 9/11 attacks that in this apartment that Ahmed al-Haznawi and Ziad Jarrah was staying in, they found this cardboard replica of a Boeing airliner cockpit in the apartment. And that they had panels, and it was made to look like a cockpit there. In other words, they were. Why would they leave it in the apartment, right? Why wouldn't they just destroy the evidence behind them? And almost like he's teaching, either Jarrah was teaching Haznawi about the plane, or Jarrah was practicing how to be in a. I don't know. I mean, you go figure. But like days later, they would go to New Jersey and stay at the Days Inn Motel, and that's where they were staying in. And then on September 10th, Ziad Jarrah and Ahmed al-Haznawi go to Springfield, New Jersey, to use a computer at Kinko's, and they stay here at 58 minutes. This is according to the FBI timeline, financial transaction timeline, and they paid for this computing using Ahmed al-Nami's credit card. On this evening, also, this is very important. This is going to be important later on in our talk. Ziad Jarrah actually spends his final evening writing a letter to his girlfriend, Azel Singui. Now, he writes the letter, and the letter is public. It's in my Medium article, and The Guardian actually posted. It's the only publication that posted. And the letter is widely interpreted as a suicide note, but it's very vague. And the messages are vague. In the letter, it's stating that he'll see Seguin at another time in the future, in other words. So, but the letter itself doesn't reach Hazel Seguin, because by the time the letter is actually mailed to her, she's actually at the German authorities. She's actually putting out a missing person notice to Ziad Jarrah because she can't get in touch with him. And by that time, they find out what happened, and she's in witness protection. And by the way, what happened with the letter is that the address is spelled wrong. So, which is pretty mysterious, because, you know, if you're writing a letter to a person that you love so dearly, and it's the final letter of your life, you'd think you would get the address correct. But no, the address is incorrect.
There's nothing overt in the letter, right? There's nothing that says...
No.
Because she's completely... No one's ever suspected that she was in any way involved in any of this.
Right.
She's not radical at all.
Right.
She's Turkish, kind of relatively secular. Really quite a secular Muslim. And, so at no point does Jarrah tell her, I've become involved in this thing, and we're going to do this operation to take down the great Satan and all the rest. There's nothing like that in it, right? There's just...
Right, the letter is very vague. And the letter has almost like this vague premonition of seeing her in future. But there's nothing really revealing about it in terms of the operation. So he's not going to tell her what he's doing, in other words. But at the end of the letter, he says, he states that, I don't expect you to understand this great thing that we're going to perform. But that was basically about the only hint he ever drops to her. But if you read the letter, it's just like, it's basically telling her that he loves her, and vague references of seeing her in the future. But I will see you in time, or something he says. Right, something like that, to that extent. But the letter was returned to the United States by the Postal Service, and it was discovered and delivered. It was actually intercepted by the FBI. Now, if you want to play the speculation game, maybe that's exactly what he wanted all along, the letter to be publicly known, whatever, in regards to maybe saying in the future, if it ever came out that he was never on the plane. I mean, that I'm willing to go into with you in regards to Flight 93. I've always stated that he wasn't the pilot of Flight 93. And
well, I guess we'll come on to that bit in a minute. But it is, now I think it's kind of strange that he didn't sit down with a video camera and clearly record in English his reasons for doing what he did.
Right, for sure. And, I thought about that too. I said, well, why didn't he, give her a more direct answer? Like,
and his wider family, because his family never accepted he did it. To this day, they don't believe he was involved.
That's exactly right, Richard. In fact, to this very day, they just did a recent interview of his father, Samir, and I forgot the name of the publication that did the interview, but during the interview, they went to the house, and they said the father's on medication. He's still a nervous wreck, even years later. We're talking 18 years later. And the father still states that, his son, because they think they have a theory that his son was on the plane and tried to dispel the hijackers from hijack the plane. He was killed.
Sure.
But they do not believe for 1 second.
So let's talk about the plane then, if we're okay to move on to that. So the commission report has it that I've just missed my place in it. Hang on a second. We'll cut this bit and go back to saying, I probably won't cut it, actually be more authentic, but the commission report has him, Jarrah's in seat 1B, closest to the cockpit, and the other hijackers were in 3C, 3D, and 6B. And he checked in, I think all four men checked in at between 7:39 and 7:48. So he seems to be well placed on Flight 93. Okay.
Well, if I can make a correction, Richard, he's well placed at Newark Airport.
Right.
Not in the plane. Right. I fully believe he was at the airport.
Okay. So you think that this is I think this is really, one of the most interesting cases that you make around 9/11. And maybe Nelson Martin's is along this line. I don't want to speak for him, he's not here, but maybe he's interested in this kind of area too, right? That Jarrah either wasn't on the plane, or possibly didn't fly the plane, or possibly wasn't who he's perceived to be. And I think there's interesting reason to look at all those things. Okay, so let's start with that then. Of like, why do you think that he might not have been on the plane and might not have been the pilot?
Sure, two instances.
Obviously, if he
here.
wasn't on the plane, he wasn't the pilot. But let's look at
right, right. Let's go with that. I think that's a great place to start. Actually, there's two instances as why I don't believe. Now, I just want to make this really clear. What I'm implying here is speculation, and very light speculation. This is not something that's delving into the fantastical. Okay, this is going by why I feel that he wasn't on the plane. Now, for one, when Flight 93 took off and it was hijacked, there was more phone calls on that plane made than any other flights. Now, I know there are people that say the phone calls can't be true. They dismiss phone calls that work at that flight. But if you look at the phone calls, they contradict the 9/11 official narrative. That's what people want, of the truther community. That's why I think they make this mistake. The people who don't believe that they were hijackers or the phone calls were made.
So here we have another incident of like what we've talked about with no plane hitting the Pentagon.
Correct.
Fine if you want to believe that, but the existence of that narrative detracts from people asking who was on the plane and why was the CIA protecting the hijackers around that plane. And similar with the 93 flight then, I can't speak to the technical details, okay, about the whether mobile signals on airphones, but there's a lot being made of the fella, I should have checked his name, it's Mark Bingham? Yeah, because he answers the phones, he phones his mother and says, hello, this is Mark Bingham, which is, of course, it's an unusual way to speak to your mother, but his mother said that's just what he did because he worked in an area where you gave your full name when you answered the phone. It's kind of force of habit for him. And, of course, if you're going to fake a phone call, you would notice that was a very artificial way to do it, right? So if it was, but again, whatever you believe about that, believing the phone calls are entirely fake detracts from what was said in them, which contradicts the narrative, right? So carry on, Adam, with how do the phone calls contradict the narrative?
Right. There were actually 5 phone calls that contradicted the narrative. Now, one of them was from Tom Burnett. I'll explain each phone call. Tom Burnett made several phone calls to his wife, for example. And one time he got through and he says, honey, we're being hijacked. There are 3 men. Okay, there were 3 men. Mark Bingham actually calls his mother. And he explains to her, Mom, we're being hijacked. There are 3 men on board. Jeremy Glick called his wife. And he was a lot more specific. And his phone call, which is very important, because his phone call gave an actual physical description. He's the only one that does this. And he says that he called his wife, and he says that there were 3 men. All the men were dark-skinned males, and all 3 were wearing red bandanas. Okay. Cece Lyles calls her husband, but husband's not home. She leaves a message. She says, honey, we're being hijacked. There are 3 guys on the plane. Todd Beamer actually tried to call his wife, and he couldn't get through, and he's rerouted to a GTE phone operator named Lisa Jefferson. And he tells her, and his call lasts a long time. He's the only call that lasts, I think, 15, 20 minutes long. And he states to her that we're being hijacked. There were 3 men on board. Now, okay, if you want to say one person, 2 people got it wrong, that there were 3 hijacked instead of 4, you have 5 phone calls now that are specifically telling you that there were 3 hijackers on board. The other instance is this. In 2006, in the Zacharias Moussaoui trial, Flight 93 has the only cockpit voice recorder that actually was recovered and worked. All the other flights, the cockpit voice recorder was too badly damaged, supposedly. The cockpit voice recorder was found with the Pentagon, but it was too badly damaged. But the cockpit voice recorder was not found at the World Trade Center, either from Flight 11-175, suspected, not found. Okay. The audio recovered was actually played in a separate room for the victims' families attending that trial, the victims' families of Flight 93. And the audio was only played once. And even though the audio is not public, the transcript is actually public. Okay? And why is this important? If you go all the way at the ending, and I think if it's on Wiki, I want to say Wiki pages or something like that, it posts the whole transcript. Now, at the very bottom, I want to say timestamp 1, comma 00, comma 37.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll link to it. It's not long. Okay, so you won't have any trouble finding what you're referring to.
Right. And at the bottom, there's a person sitting next to the pilot. And while the passengers are ramming the food cart to the door to trying to get into the cockpit, the person is saying, Saeed, up, down, the plane. In other words, put the plane up and down to throw off the passengers. That's exactly what happened, because according to the flight data recorder, the plane actually makes herky-jerky moves up and down. And this is actually echoed by another plane that actually saw the plane making movements. And it was actually a private plane that actually was nearby. It was being contacted by, I think, Indianapolis ATC at that time. And they were actually saying, can you see the plane? They saw the plane making herky-jerky movements to the left and right, up and down. And this was to thwart off the passengers of the plane. Now, who is Saeed? Well, there is a Saeed on the plane. It's Saeed Al-Ghamdi. According to the 9/11 Commission, Saeed Al-Ghamdi is one of the muscle hijackers. Also, in Burnett's phone call, Tom Burnett's phone call, he's stating that there were 3 hijackers. They were all dark-skinned males. Ziad Jarrah is not dark-skinned.
Yeah.
Saeed Al-Ghamdi, Ahmed Al-Haznawi, and Ahmed Al-Nami are all dark-skinned.
Yeah.
And if they're saying that they saw 3 hijackers, now there's also the counterpoint. Well, maybe all these people didn't see Ziad Jarrah enter the cockpit because he actually is seated in 1B. Well, how did they explain seeing all the 3 other hijackers? Remember, there's 2 hijackers in the cockpit and 1 outside the door. The guy outside the door is wearing a bomb belt. According to the audio that the families heard, they actually heard that guy being killed by the passengers revolting. So now, all right, there's 1 guy, he's dead. There's 2 people in the cockpit. That's 3. Where's the 4th hijacker?
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote in that Medium article, the missing 9/11 hijacker.
Okay, yeah.
Now,
I was just going to, the commission report does touch upon this. Right, it notes that several passengers in 1993 describe only 3 hijackers.
That's correct.
Some people speculated whether one of the hijackers had been able to use the cockpit jump seat as a trainee pilot. They don't think that's true. They think one of them, probably Ziad Jarrah, just remained in his seat calmly until and then just slipped into the cockpit. And it also talks about Jarrah responding to the uprising on the plane by rolling the airplane and to try to get people off balance. But it doesn't mention the fact that the voice recorder picked up Saeed and not Ziad.
Correct. Now, out of all 4 men, Ahmed Haznawi is the tallest, but they're all actually short men. And that's when Sandra Bradshaw, flight attendant on Flight 93, states that that all 3 men were very short. Another flight attendant on Flight 93. And she actually, I actually should have mentioned this before. There were 6 calls, actually. Sandra Bradshaw was one of the calls, and she's a flight attendant. She actually leaves a voice message. And she states that the 3 men were very short. And they're actually, one of them is actually yelling. And this is very interesting because it's not reported anywhere else. She actually states that one of the hijackers is actually exclaiming that they're trying to crash the plane at the U.S. Capitol. In the 9/11 Commission report, they're stating that they don't know where the plane was going. And that's true, too, because I think that's true because the Pentagon, actually, when they're evacuating the Pentagon, they're saying another plane is actually, they don't know where that plane is going, actually. So nobody knows where the planes are going. But according to Sandra Bradshaw, yes, one of the hijackers states that they wanted to crash the plane into the U.S. Capitol and that everybody's going to die. Now, this is important, too, because this would be the reason why the passengers revolted anyway, right? Because if they knew that this was because Flight 11, nobody was, fighting back or anything like that, and with 77 either. And that's only because the hijackers didn't announce their declarations or their intentions. Flight 93, they did. According to Flight 175, there's rumors saying that was the case. I don't know if that's going to be true. I don't want to speculate too deeply. I mean, I'm speculating enough. But with Flight 93, that was the case. In fact, that's the only plane right now as we speak that had information, that legitimate factual information where the hijackers had their intentions known. And according to 9/11 Commission 2, Ziad Jarrah actually makes, he uses the cockpit radio, and he states, I think, quote, if I'm going to do this correctly, it goes, "I am the captain on board. We're going back to the airport, so please sit." According to those who knew him in Florida, they were saying that yes, the recording did sound like Jarrah, but they weren't too sure. Also, too, who also spoke English? Well, Saeed al-Ghamdi actually spoke a little bit of English. Haznawi spoke a little bit of English. Now, whether they did declarations or not, I don't know. Like I said before, this is speculation, but it's not delving into the fantastic, not too ridiculous. As opposed to what I'm using it, why I'm believing this is because I believe that the pastors only did see 3 hijackers. And I don't think that, if you listen to the, also to the ATC recording, which is available on YouTube, Leroy Homer, who's the first captain on board Flight 93, he actually, under duress, I mean, he's getting, either he's being killed or he's being rendered unconscious. He actually flips a switch at the side where it's the ATC radio device where ATC is actually listening to the plane being hijacked. And so you can hear Leroy Homer giving out the Mayday signal, not once but twice. And he says, "Mayday, Mayday, get out of here," quote unquote. He says, "Get out of here." So if Ziad Jarrah is actually the only one, he's actually being helped with another hijacking the plane, other people would have saw this and they would have made the necessary, there was 4 hijackers. But they all said 3. Everybody said 3. 6 people said 3 hijackers. So that's what I'm basing my information on. And also with the transcript recording of the person sitting next to the pilot saying Saeed
Sure.
drive the plane.
There's other reasons, right? Ziad Jarrah has an interesting family.
Sure.
Right. The 2 of his cousins had different intelligence connections. One of them came out quite quickly afterwards to have worked for the East German intelligence back in the day. And the other and perhaps more relevant one, I think, came out was several years later. I think it was 2011. Ali al-Jarrah, who was also Lebanese, but worked for the Mossad, Israeli intelligence, and seemingly to quite to a level sufficient to earn him. Let's just check. Yeah, it was right. $300,000 a year he was paid as a spy for Mossad. So that's unless Mossad pay disproportionately well compared to other agencies, that's quite a sum of money. So it's just quite close to home, right? I don't know how you want to maybe talk about this, Adam, that with the Israelis monitoring the goings-on of the Hamburg cell in Florida and maybe the urban moving system angle, and just how the close proximity of Ziad Jarrah having this Mossad relative, and that maybe you can apply 2 different narratives to Jarrah, on one narrative that he's the young man who gets radicalized and joins in Al-Qaeda's terrorist plot, or is there the possibility that he was infiltrating and monitoring on behalf of an intelligence agency, maybe Mossad?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think this is a little bit too close to home. Again, if we're going to delve into the background of his family, yes, there were 2 uncles. One, Assem al-Jarrah. Assem al-Jarrah has been a long-time spy for at least 3 governments, one of them including Israel, as far back as 1983, and actually had links to the Lockerbie bombing. And I won't get into that. The second uncle, Ali al-Jarrah, who was arrested in 2011, who was a Lebanese school administrator and had lived in the country all his life. He was arrested by Lebanese authorities, and he had been a spy for Israel for 25 years. He had a brother, Joseph al-Jarrah, Ali al-Jarrah brother Joseph, who was also suspected of being as well an Israeli spy, but not as long. Now, I'm not saying that Ziad Jarrah is an Israeli spy. What I'm going to imply here is basically what your comment about being too close to home regard is. In September 12th of 2001, one day after the 9/11 attacks, of Urban Moving Systems van, which, by the way, at this point had an all-points bulletin, which was given earlier in the day of September 11th by the New York Joint Terrorism Task Force and the FBI, meaning that all local authorities in the United States would be on the lookout. In a town called York, Pennsylvania, which is about approximately, I think it was 100 miles from Shanksville. But why I'm implying this is important. The truck was actually pulled over by Pennsylvania sheriff's deputies, and they detained two people. Their names are Modi Butbul and Roy Barak. And these two individuals worked for Urban Moving Systems in Weehawken, New Jersey, the same company that had the 5 dancing Israelis, as the media called them, detained in September 11th on New Jersey Turnpike. Why is this important? Well, when they detained Roy Barak and Modi Butbul, they explained why they were in this area, and they said that they were moving a client from Chicago to New Jersey. Sheriff's deputies then handed over these men to the FBI, and the FBI actually called the manager of Urban Moving Systems, Dominic Suter. And they explained that we have 2 of your employees here in York, Pennsylvania. They were saying they were moving a client from Chicago to New York. Meanwhile, there's no furniture in the van. And Dominic Suter said specifically that he found that strange, quote unquote, strange. Why? Because he didn't have any clientele outside the state of New Jersey because of the attacks itself. And so the FBI decided to want to interview him a second time. They wanted to interview him a first time, and he did. He complied. And when they wanted to interview a second time, because of this incident, he flew back to Israel, leaving behind the company. John Miller of 2020 did an expose on this, and he's the only person that did an expose specifically on Urban Moving Systems. And it's hard to find the video interview, but when he got the keys to inside the Urban Moving Systems, and it was all furniture. There was furniture for months and months and months of clientele. He even showed a picture of the voice messaging, and there were 99 plus messages. It was all from people who were complaining about where their furniture was. So in other words, that these people weren't really moving people in the last final month or two, it seems, because the warehouse was full of furniture and there was angry people demanding where their furniture was in regards to move. But the story died right there on the vine. Now, what am I implying here anyway? Well, when FBI and other local investigators were combing the area, now remember, the Flight 93 debris field is 8 miles long, and there's conspiracies relating that the plane was shot down and that, it left a long debris field. No. The debris field was basically paper because Flight 93 had 25,000 pieces of mail. And so because of the mail and the nylon and the clothing that was found on the plane was scattered over a debris field of 8 miles long. Yeah, it wasn't windy, but it doesn't take much wind to throw a piece of paper like a letter, further down the road in 24 or 36 hours. So that's why the debris field was so long. And also, too, who knows? They found, remember, they find Ziad Jarrah's passport, his ID card, in the rubble. But who knows where they exactly found it? Did they find it by the impact hole? Or did they find it in the wide debris field by Shanksville? Because if you wanted to go this route and say those 2 men who were detained by Urban Moving System, Roy Barak, Roy Butbul, if they wanted to leave Ziad Jarrah's ID card in the debris field, yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, they could have burned it. And they could have left it in the wide debris field. That's speculation, right? I just want to be sad. But if you want to imply that that's what happened. And also, too, and also, too, if I could just interject here, yep. Also, too, one of the pieces of mail that they found with Ziad Jarrah linking to 93 was a business card to Assem El Jarrah.
Yeah.
uncle. And by the way, while his family disregards that Ziad Jarrah was on the plane, there was only one family member that states that yes, he was on that plane. Assam Jarrah. So when you say that, yeah, this is a little bit too close home, I absolutely agree with you.
That's right. And the family said Assam Jarrah makes things up for money, right?
That's right.
With regard to him saying, oh yeah, Ziad Jarrah became radicalized.
Right. No, nobody in the soul. And he had a very big family, by the way. And every single one. Now, of course, you'll have people that are in denial and say their son couldn't do this. But I mean, even years later, when they even asked for the death certificate from Wally Miller, who's in charge of the coronary. I mean, now it's the FBI. The FBI has it. But the family even states that they were not giving any information. They tried at the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon to get more information about Ziad Jarrah, but they wouldn't give it to them.
Well, there is DNA evidence putting him on the flight, isn't there?
Sure. Yes. Wally Miller collected, I'll make this short, they collected all the DNA evidence, approximately 600 pounds of human remains were recovered from the impact point. And that includes the 4 hijackers as well. Now, we don't know what kind of DNA they found, but supposedly DNA from all 4 of the hijackers. We don't know what they found regarding the hijackers, but that's at the FBI headquarters. Now, FBI headquarters states that the families themselves never came and regarded getting the death certificates because all the family states that they don't believe that they were involved. I happen to think that a lot of those families are in denial, but who knows? But
just to be clear on why Ziad Jarrah's family is saying that, is that they say they never saw any signs whatsoever of radicalization going on. Okay, so if someone's radicalized, you would expect. It's okay. So you could say that's because they're keeping it quiet because they've got this covert op going on. But if someone's radicalized, you'd expect them to go through a phase of being very vocal about it and transforming, and then suddenly go quiet because they've got the secret operation they're taking part. And his family say they never saw anything like that. He was in constant contact. They actually don't accept that he went to Afghanistan, although it seems conclusive that he did go to Afghanistan. They talk about him never being out of phone contact for long enough. It would be hard for him to go to Afghanistan. And the other thing they bring up is that there's this strange trip he makes to New York prior to ever going to Germany, right? That there is a Ziad Jarrah living in New York in 1995 who rented an apartment. The son of the owner also rented an apartment there and said they used to joke about him and his flatmate being strange, maybe involved in some kind of terrorist thing. He was a photographer there, and afterwards, after 9/11, when shown a picture of him, he was identified as, oh yeah, that's the guy that was in the apartment. They identified him, but his family say that this is a different Ziad Jarrah, and they point out that as being evidence of some deeper covert op going on, because they say he was never out of the country, he was never out of Lebanon before going to Hamburg, Germany. So that's a very strange aspect to this story.
Right. I don't think that Ziad Jarrah was actually in New York, the actual one, because at the time, even the father, Salim, says that he was living in Lebanon at the time.
Sure, but then it's like it's another Ziad Jarrah that also acts suspiciously and looks exactly like the Ziad Jarrah.
Right, exactly.
That's what's strange.
Right, and also, right, it leads more questions. You have more questions than answers, right? As to what was the Operation 9/11 known even as far back as then, and they tried to give Ziad Jarrah doubles elsewhere outside, which would make sense if you want to have an insider, for example, like a Ziad Jarrah, to monitor the operations and make sure it goes smoothly, and also lend back the information to specific intelligence agencies such as the Mossad itself, or the CIA, or the Saudi GID, if you want to have an actual insider into the operation itself. And that's what intelligence agencies do. They don't need to be having fake planes or fake passengers or fake phone calls. All you need is to have the information before the operation happens, and you can manipulate the operation as to where the operation could go smoothly or without interference from local authorities like the FBI or from New York police department, or from the Florida, wherever state that these guys were living in, and that their backgrounds are clean, and they can make it appear that these people weren't radical Islamists, which was what Ziad Jarrah was trying to display. But according to his background, that's not exactly what it was, and that's the reason why I wanted to bring up his earlier years, because he was living amongst Christians. He was living amongst Jews in the Bekaa Valley, which is known to have this amalgamous, almost this diverse population. Lebanon is home, by the way, to the largest Christian population in all of the Arab world. It's also home to Hezbollah. Hezbollah is considered the greatest enemy outside of Iran, or they link it together more so than, say, the Salafists, who are, the biggest terrorists of all. Hezbollah is not a Salafist organization. So what I'm trying to show you here is, in regards to this podcast, was that showing you the background of Ziad Jarrah, which so many people within the debunkers or truther communities, where they just dismiss, or they go with the official narrative that dismiss the hijackers and say these guys never existed. I think that's a big mistake. Go look at the backgrounds of certain people like a Ziad Jarrah, Muhammad with Ziad Jarrah here in this podcast, is that, yes, this guy grew up not as a terrorist at all, or reading from the Quran. This guy was a secularist. He was friends with Jews and Christians. And when he gets right to Germany, what does he do? He goes right into the Islamist phase. I mean, 2 months. He's already visiting these Islamists.
So what I think we need to mention then is, like, if you look at all the young men working for an intelligence agency who are sent out to infiltrate radical mosques, like Eamon Dean, perhaps, for the British, and Morton Storm for the Danish, and so on. You can probably name other examples, or in other settings, like infiltrating the IRA or something, or any other you'd care to mention. Ziad Jarrah's actions would also be kind of consistent with that, right? Of someone who's not in any way radical, who goes to live in Hamburg and just instantly gets involved in the most radical segments there, going to these extremist mosques and such. That you could posit like 2 reasons for that, and they both kind of work. That he's a young man who's like suddenly far from home and wants to cling to some kind of culture and goes down a very dark rabbit hole, or that he, through his family connections to Mossad, perhaps, is sent there with the mission of, like, we really need to uncover what's going on in these mosques so you can be our eyes and ears on the ground. And it seems to me that both of those narratives kind of work for Jarrah. Would you agree with that? Or maybe you'd have some thoughts yourself on examples of infiltrators?
No, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think I would add too is that, Cofer Black once said that he was appalled that we didn't have any contacts within Al-Qaeda, so this way we could closely monitor them. With all intelligence apparatuses like the CIA, Mossad, the Saudi Jihad, the Pakistani NSI, these groups, these Al-Qaeda groups, aren't hard at all to infiltrate. I mean, I happen to think that the counter argument was that, well, they didn't have Arab speakers at the NSA, or well, that's not the case with these Arab intelligence apparatuses. I mean, of course they could easily infiltrate these groups, and they can monitor it closely. And why wouldn't they? I mean, if you're going to destroy Al-Qaeda, you destroy it from within, and not with just carpet bombing them in Afghanistan or Iraq. Yeah.
Or you control it from within and keep the useful element of it around, right? But
right.
This is something that I found very hard to get my head around, and even in conversations with people somewhat on the inside, it doesn't become any clearer for me. This idea that that the CIA was unable to infiltrate Al-Qaeda, when you have thousands of Americans going across and joining Mujahideen groups in Bosnia, etc., through the 90s, going through the Al-Qifa Center in New York. And as you say, Adam, that's the harder part, right? Because how much easier, there's no cultural divide that stops the Egyptian intelligence or the Saudi intelligence infiltrating. So you kind of assume it must have happened. And when you do read accounts of people doing this, it doesn't appear to be, it never comes across as something that is unreplicable, like Eamon Dean and Morton Storm as 2 infiltrators. If you read their accounts, very, very quickly, they were right at the heart of things. And that seems to be the case of the Hamburg cell too, that they go to Afghanistan and they're meeting bin Laden straight away. And they're chosen very quickly for Al-Qaeda's most high-profile operation, you know? So it's not like they had to spend years working their way up to get the trust to be on the inside.
Right, I wanted to bring that up too. I thought that was very important as to how a group like Al-Qaeda couldn't be compromised because of their internal security. Yeah, I think they have internal security, but I'll give you a great example of what you just implied just now. Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Sheikh, and Ziad Jarrah. All right, these are young students from Germany. They don't have long careers in any type of mujahideen terrorist actions. These are relative newcomers. They don't know much about them, other than what Mahmoud Nadar Ghazali and Mohammed Haidar Zamar, two known terrorist contacts who have years and years of dealing with terrorist organizations abroad, and who groomed these people. I mean, they went right to Afghanistan, and they met with, the first person they met was Mohammed Atef, who's the military commander-in-chief, and the second person they met was not Ayman al-Zawahiri, but Osama bin Laden himself. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that they, right away, they go to Afghanistan. The first week, they meet with two of the most important people within Al-Qaeda. It seems to me that it doesn't take much to meet with these people if you just have a very unexperienced background in dealing with Al-Qaeda subjects elsewhere. If you go by the testimony of Slahi and bin Shabib, in which I told you to take with a grain of salt, you would think that these guys, were told the whole world about the whole operation itself, up and down. Why would you trust these guys? I mean, these are relative newcomers. So, I mean, it would, in other words, for the intelligence apparatuses abroad in the Arab world, it would be, a cakewalk for them to infiltrate groups like Al-Qaeda or Abu Sayyaf or the Islamic State groups now that are relevant. But yeah, I mean, these large-scale groups like this, groups that have like an international threat, you damn well better believe that the intelligence apparatuses are infiltrating these groups. I mean, they infiltrate domestic organizations like Occupy Wall Street or any other green...
Well, the British were infiltrating like green peace activists during the 90s who were blocking roads being built, and that was what Special Branch were up to. So people who were, they might stop a road being built, but they're not going to blow up London or something, So it's been, and also an example that comes to mind is the British soldier who goes by the name of Kevin Fulton, who infiltrated the IRA. His handlers in MI5 were going to have him executed basically by the IRA to protect a higher source. Now, had that happened, or had he died in any operation, he would forever be known as an IRA volunteer. They would never have revealed that he was working for the British Army. Okay, so like people who are, it's just a given then that there must be people who die on these operations who are actually working for state intelligence agencies, and we never know that. They go down in history as being terrorists.
Collateral damage.
Yeah. So, I don't feel I can conclude one way or the other with Ziad Jarrah what was going on there, only that there are a sufficient number of anomalies to say, well, we're really not comfortable with the story as it's told. And, his family have a case there that who knows really what went on. So
right, because the only story we've gotten is from the 9/11 Commission report. They're the only independent commission report that dealt with the Hamburg cell. Joint House inquiry dealt with the intelligence agencies. But where did this information come from? Well, it came from the testimonies of Abu Zubaydah, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and other al-Qaeda subjects that are in Guantanamo currently, that have all been waterboarded, tortured, especially the information coming out of Afghanistan, okay? That Atta, bin Shabib, Ziad Jarrah, Marwan al-Sheikh all went to these training camps, whom, by the way, were inoperable after the 9/11 attacks, because that's what the military went to Afghanistan to destroy these training camps, but they were already non-functional before they even went there. But the testimony coming out of there is coming from the subjects in which they've been tortured. So that's why I say that to take that information with a grain of salt. And it's also contradictory to the people who knew these people personally, especially Ziad Jarrah, who all claimed that he never went to Afghanistan. And that's why I felt that this podcast was a little bit important, and that I want to say straight out too. I'm not saying that Ziad Jarrah worked for Israeli or Israeli intelligence, but again, I'll use your quote that yes, it's a little bit too close to home for me as well, in regards to his family being involved with many years, even decades, regarding Israeli intelligence and intelligence agencies of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, and Syria as well. That's Al Jarrah, going back to 1983. I mean, his family's filled with intelligence apparatuses. So who do you believe? Well, I'll leave it up to you, the listener. I'll let you believe, but believe not because it fits your worldview, but because of the evidence that's presented.
Okay, Adam, I think we could probably go on for quite a while about this, but we probably should conclude it there. And where will we go next? I mean, it'd be interesting to look at Mohammed Atta maybe at some point. We've got more interviews coming up. Maybe we've touched on urban moving systems. We might talk about that at some point. But yeah, be very interested in anyone's comments on Ziad Jarrah and what we've touched on in this episode. And yeah, okay, great.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Adam. See you soon.